Hat, sunglasses, Pepsi, notes, sources, thick skin, check. You already know. Let's go. Golden Blooded is a college football YouTube channel for entertainment. So make sure to hit that like and subscribe button, and let's get into our next college football video. Don't forget to send gear to represent your team. The address is P.O. Box 360, Liberty, South Carolina 29657. Now, we know for sure, without a shadow of a doubt, that Oklahoma and Texas are headed to the SEC. And a lot of people thought that it could be happening sooner rather than later, including myself. And even the Big 12 football schedule coming out for 2023 didn't come out till February. So that led a lot of people to think, hey, maybe Oklahoma and Texas are trying to negotiate their way out sooner rather than later. And I thought that was happening. And that's exactly what they were trying to do. However, talks have stalled. So it looks like, not for sure, but it looks like Oklahoma and Texas will be in the Big 12 in 2023 and 2024. And then they will make their exit to the SEC in 2025. Now, having said that, a lot of people think that more teams will be heading with Oklahoma and Texas to the SEC. That's an interesting idea right there. So I'm going to the Get It Gang for the ideas for this particular video, and there's 3 different comments that I want to address. What's the Get It Gang, you might ask? Well, the Get It Gang is the name that I gave the group of people that leave video ideas in the comments section of these videos. So if you think you have a good video idea, just leave it in the comments section, and I just might use your comment as a video idea. The first comment I want to read is from Reginald Hall. He says, "What Abel?" I think you meant about, so I'm going to read about. "What about the SEC goes after Washington and Oregon?" That's interesting. "The SEC is so quiet." I think you meant quiet, so it reads, "The SEC is so quiet. I think more teams coming with Oklahoma and Texas." Never know. Speaking about Texas and Oklahoma, they will be in the SEC at the end of the 2023 regular season. I think it's the 2024 regular season because the talks negotiating their early buyout have stalled. Now, it could still happen, but as of right now, I think they're staying till past the 2024 season. The next comment is from J. Glizzy 1999. He says, "I have another video suggestion. West Virginia be deciding to leave the Big 12 for the SEC if the Big 12 don't expand east and more teams out west join the Big 12. That could be a possibility, but the problem is they have to get invited. It's not just, a team decides, hey, I want to join this conference and it's a done deal. No, they have to get an invite from that conference. So if the SEC invites West Virginia and the Big 12 doesn't add any teams on the east side, yes, West Virginia could join the SEC. In fact, even if the Big 12 does add teams on the east, if they get an invite from the SEC, they're going to head to the SEC. And finally, the last comment from Justin R. "I could see the Big 12 taking the 4 corner schools with Washington State and Oregon State. Then the Big 12 would let UCF, West Virginia, and WU go to the ACC. It's a win-win. The Big 12 kills off the Pac-12 and gets out west. The ACC gets more solid football programs in UCF and Cincinnati. WU gets to play their rivals. If ESPN asks the ACC to restructure the deal, ESPN gets Clemson and Florida State to the SEC. I have no idea what Miami does. If they end up in the Big Ten or something else, the ACC replaces them with USF or something." That's a good idea right there. But I want to take all of this and put it into one video. So like I said earlier, Oklahoma and Texas headed to the SEC. Could they be bringing in more teams with Oklahoma and Texas? They're just not announcing it yet. Yes, that's a possibility. Who would the teams be? Who would those 2 teams be? And I would think it would be 2 more teams. I don't think they would add any more than that. And all of what I'm about to say depends on if the SEC finds out that the ACC teams, the numbers needed to vote to dissolve the grant of rights, is not going to happen. If the ACC is in danger or not. If the SEC hears that those 8 teams are going to vote to dissolve, then this is not going to happen. But if they hear that they're going to have to wait until 2036, then this might happen. First suggestion, Oregon and Washington. I don't think the likelihood of this is very good. I think it's a very, very low likelihood that the SEC goes out and get Oregon and Washington. Is it possible? Yes, but not likely at all. If you notice the SEC expansion, they're not like the Big Ten or the Big 12. The Big Ten and the Big 12 have stretched beyond their borders massively. They're not slowly doing it, it's massively. So the Big Ten went out and got Nebraska a while back, stretched out west, but then this go around, they went all the way west with USC and UCLA. So maybe they stretched a little bit past their borders with Nebraska, but then with USC and UCLA, they stretched well beyond their borders. And then for the Big 12, we know that after they learned they lost Oklahoma and Texas, they went all over the place. They got Cincinnati still technically within their borders, but only because they stretched well beyond their borders to go out and get West Virginia the first go around. They got BYU, not that big of a stretch, but still a stretch, and then UCF. UCF was a stretch. But with the SEC, it's a different story. With the first go around, they went and got Missouri and Texas A&M. That's just a little bit outside of their borders. And then this go around, we know they're getting Texas and Oklahoma. So they already have the state of Texas with Texas A&M. But Oklahoma, that is stretching a little bit. But it's not that far of a stretch. So I don't think the SEC is wanting to go coast to coast. I just don't see it happening. I think they're the one conference that's like, no, we want to try to stay in our region as much as possible. But West Virginia and Oklahoma State would make sense. You bring in West Virginia and Oklahoma State with Texas and Oklahoma. That stretches your footprint to a new state in West Virginia, and it locks in Bedlam with Oklahoma State. So there is some upside to that. The biggest question about that is, would it increase the revenue enough to invite West Virginia and Oklahoma State? I don't think so. And you see it. I'm a West Virginia fan. But I just don't think that West Virginia and Oklahoma State would increase the revenue enough to invite them. In fact, I don't know if they would increase the revenue at all. Oklahoma and Texas, those are needle movers for the SEC. West Virginia, Oklahoma State, I don't see them being needle movers for the SEC. The ACC, however, I would see West Virginia and Oklahoma State being needle movers. The biggest thing in this particular scenario is, well, the ACC has a terrible TV deal. Terrible, horrible. In fact, they need to renegotiate that TV deal. If I were the ACC commissioner, I would say, hey, we'll shorten the deal. That way you don't have to keep this conference intact 100% until 2036. But we need a pay bump. So it's really a win-win. You're shortening the deal. That way, if ESPN wants to grab some teams out of the ACC and puts them into the SEC, they don't have to wait as long. And it's a win for the ACC because they're showing, hey, we see more value in our teams than what we're getting. So bump up the pay. It doesn't have to be a massive bump, but enough to where it's noticeable, and then you can shorten the deal. I think ESPN wins on one side, and I think the ACC also wins on the other side. So if I were the ACC commissioner, I would try to get that deal done. Maybe shorten it to either 2030, 2031, and then get the teams a bump. And then, if there's some conference realignment after that deal is over with in 2030 or 2031, at least you can draw in some more teams because you can say, hey, we renegotiated a terrible TV deal. We will try to get the most money possible if you join the ACC. So the ACC losing Clemson, Florida State, North Carolina, and another team, whether it's Virginia Tech, Miami, whatever, wouldn't hurt as much. And it depends on if the Big Ten is interested in more teams. And if those teams would want to go to other conferences. Because here's the thing. The teams that are in the ACC, they like being in the ACC. They just don't like the money. So maybe you would be able to keep more brands, not all the brands that you would lose otherwise, like your NC States, your Virginia Techs, or Miami Hurricanes, or Pitt, or Syracuse, or Louisville. Definitely your Wake Forest and Boston College. Then you could go out and try to poach some teams from the Big 12, like a West Virginia. That would help out significantly. Rivalries already built in. Then you could try to grab Cincinnati, UCF, and then try to grab maybe an Oklahoma State, and then try to get a footprint in the state of Texas by trying to grab either Baylor or TCU or Houston, or maybe two of those, Baylor and TCU. That would be a great get for the ACC. So for the ACC to avoid doomsday, they need to renegotiate that TV deal, but at the same time, make it to where it seems like ESPN is winning at the same time. Otherwise, you stay in this TV deal, and those teams made sure that there was an out. 8 teams vote to dissolve, and poof goes the ACC, and there's no hope. But you have to get ahead of this train, ACC. Otherwise, you're flat out doomed. 4 teams will go to the SEC, 4 teams will go to the Big Ten, and 4 teams will go to the Big 12, and all that's left is what? Wake Forest and Boston College, and they're probably headed to the AAC. And the ACC exists no longer. Would it be a weaker ACC with those 8 schools leaving, and then adding some teams from the Big 12? Yes, it would be weaker, but you would still be able to carry that title of a Power 5 conference and have a decent TV deal and make it make sense. So you could say the ACC, as we know it, has its days numbered. You are going to lose some schools, but the thing is, can you stop the bleeding by renegotiating that TV deal, shortening it, but increasing the bump and then retaining more schools than if you wouldn't have done that, and keeping the Big 12 out of the equation? That's what's going to decide whether the ACC survives or not. Because teams are going to jump. Teams are going to jump to the SEC, and teams are going to jump to the Big 10. But if you can keep the Big 12 out of the equation and keep those teams that maybe the Big 12 might try to pick up, instead keep those teams, and then try to get teams from the Big 12. That's how you survive ACC. And who knows, maybe you could make a pitch to Oregon and Washington, and you could have a good TV deal. Imagine adding West Virginia, Cincinnati, UCF, Baylor, TCU, Oregon, and Washington. I think that would be a decent TV deal. But that all depends on if the Big Ten wants Oregon and Washington. If they want Oregon and Washington and the Pac-12 dissolves, then sorry ACC, you're not going to get them. So y'all let me know in the comments section. Number one, do you think it's just Texas and Oklahoma? That's it. The SEC is not going to get any more teams. Number two, do you think the ACC should do what I suggested and restructure that TV deal, but make it seem like ESPN is also winning as well? That way they can get their teams that they want into the SEC sooner rather than later, but still give the teams a revenue bump. That way when Conference Realignment rolls around again, you can keep the Big 12 out of the equation and then try to draw from the Big 12. I think it's a good idea, but do you think it's a good idea? What do you think happens with the ACC? That's all I got for you for this show. Like and subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you on my next show.